Welcome to Open Tuning, the podcast of EDFI, the Association of European Development Finance Institutions. Open Tuning looks at a world that is getting messier and at what that means for development finance. Who do we partner with as development finance institutions? Where do we show up? Why do frontier markets matter now more than ever? So the scenery is shifting, and this podcast is about learning to play with it. And you've probably all heard our pilot session with Rodrigo Madrazo. This time it's the second interview, and that is with an old hand in development finance, who's been around for quite some time and who has seen development finance from many perspectives. It's Luuk Zonneveld, who's currently the chair of the Supervisory Board of EDFI. And of course, he needs to be in our podcast list. So let's take him early on. Second session. Luuk, very welcome in Studio Sri Lanka here in Brussels. As I mentioned, you've seen development finance from many sides. And you always are a fixed feature at our EDFI Academy. We ask you to narrate to young DFI employees who just have arrived in their job to talk about development finance. Mm-hmm. Can you just try to summarize that a bit here in this podcast? Because these sessions with the young employees always score very high. So I'd like you to just see what has stayed with you most from your journey so far in development finance. What's the most important shift that you've seen, chances you've seen, growth that you've seen?
Yeah. One thing that stays with me, and it's nice you start off with talking about the academy and about especially the session for the newcomers in the DFI world. And it's actually the people. These newcomers, they come from 15 different countries. Some of them are very young, some are somewhat older, but they are all driven by this passion, I think, to base themselves on the values we have, what we can call the European values, to be value-driven and to really want to contribute to making this a world where everybody has a chance and everybody has a perspective on a good livelihood. And I think it's interesting to see among the DFI staff, whether they're new or whether they've been there for 10, 20, some people are there for 25, 30 years even. But this passion is something that they all share, and I think that we all share. People forego maybe other salary opportunities and other type of commercial settings, but it's a conscious choice to work for development finance and to really then play a joint part, a collective part in the joint story. And I think that is what for me has been most impressive.
Yeah, that's super interesting, especially now in the times of transformation. Are we able to keep that passion, keep the energy in the 3,500 people, I believe, who currently work in the EDFI system? In Lugano, we recently had our annual general meeting, and there was a strong sense there that the old between brackets, of course, but old development finance model is under pressure. Mm-hmm. Where do you see that pressure most clearly?
Well, I think the real pressure I see is coming from the countries of the DFIs themselves, of the shareholders and of the stakeholders in these countries, and of course for those DFIs that are part of the European Union, the European Commission and the European Union. I think we had in a way, it was a luxury to really be able to focus as DFIs very strongly on the developing countries, on their needs, on how to develop their commercial sectors, the private sector, and to have those, the private sector contribute to development, knowing that 90% of jobs in developing countries or anywhere around the world are jobs created by the private sector. And so that aspect is very strongly. But of course, with the changes in the world, we find ourselves, our European countries, in a different position. We are under pressure. Our economies are under pressure. I think politically, some of the countries are under pressure. There is the popular right, which comes up. And so in such a context, it becomes much more challenging for DFIs because I think rightly so, I'm a European citizen. We also need to take into account the European side of the story, make sure that when DFIs do their work, it also contributes to strengthening Europe and strengthening the individual European countries. Yeah. So for me, that is where I think most of the really clear pressure comes from.
Yeah, so it becomes far more clear that we are actually part of, are an instrument of statecraft of European governments as well. Do you think DFIs are adapting fast enough?
Well, I think the challenge for DFIs is, of course, to be able to combine both, to continue to ensure that the mission of, promotion of the private sector in developing countries and responding to their needs and taking them along is very important. And I think that's the challenge for adaptation. I mean, if I listen to the European Union, I sometimes have the feeling the European Union forgets that when they are looking at, especially, of course, we're going to have to mention it in this podcast, critical raw materials, that it's looked at very strongly from a European perspective, which is completely understandable. But for DFIs, we also need to make sure that in the long run, it also benefits the countries where these minerals are mined and transferred and exported from. And surely the EU wants to go fast, but I think the DFIs need to make sure that even if we go fast, that this other side is taken along. And so I think that's the challenge for adaptation that we have. And I personally think also speed is not always the best, the most wise thing to only focus on. So the fact that maybe sometimes some DFIs take a bit more time is maybe a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and so what matters is actually making clear that our mission matters also for Europe's strategic interest.
Yes.
I think that, that's... and also part of our mission is its development impact, of course. That's the core through private finance, through entrepreneurial activity. But to get there, we are supposed to mobilize private capital. Mm-hmm. And private capital mobilization has, in recent years, become a very important part of DFI activities. It has almost become a slogan at this moment. Everyone is talking about it. Where's the action? Where do you think the action should be? And is there action, and what would make it far more real?
Yeah, well, there has been some action. I think there are some good examples of the Impact Fund Denmark, our Danish member, or FMO in the Netherlands, where they've set up vehicles that have taken quite some take-up in the market from pension funds especially. So I think there has been good action. But I don't think we've gone far enough yet. And I think that also is something that all the CEOs of the different DFIs recognize. Maybe what we would need to do a bit more of is, like you say, it's become a bit of a slogan, but the slogan also reflects that we see it from our point of view. We want to mobilize private capital. Whereas I think if you sit on the other side of the table, and if you're a pension fund or an insurance fund or a big, private equity provider, whatever, you think from your own perspective, and pension funds, their perspective is big volumes, a decent income, but it doesn't need to be extremely high, but rather low risk. This is pensioners or future pensioners' money that they have to guarantee. And so I think as DFIs, maybe we should leave the slogan and think more about, okay, what do the people that we are looking at, what are their concerns? What's their perspective on this? And can we cater to that? And in my opinion, especially because of the high volumes, it will mean that DFIs will have to do much, much more together. I mean, if a pension fund is not looking for 100 million, but for 1 billion or 10 billion, even for the big DFIs, that's an awful lot of money and an awful lot of investments that they would need to guarantee. And so I think to really make it happen, to answer your question, is get together more, simplify the way we cooperate, align on standards and on procedures, have more trust in each other, mutual delegation, and make sure that we can then deliver what people would really want: big volumes, decent return, low risk.
Yeah. So in order to meet the investors where they are,
Yes,
we have to organize ourselves.
Yes.
And provide a scale that investors.
Maybe that should be the new slogan. I think it's very good that you coined that. Meet the investors where they are.
Right.
I think that sounds really good.
Yeah, we'll work on that. I think we're talking a bit about the current year, but if we would meet again in 2035, if we do this podcast still at that time, what would have to be different for you to say that DFI has really made a transition that we're currently in?
Okay. Well, I mean, if you look at it from a very broad historic point of view, DFIs are still a bit clear of the classical model of development cooperation. Funds in the north, led by North country governments, investing in developing countries. I think what we should see in 10 years from now is development finance institutions in developing countries that we can cooperate with, but that the driving force is no longer from here, but is in the countries, and that we then get into a real cooperation where both in developing countries and in European countries there are DFIs, and that they have joint platforms, they have joint projects, and they specialize, and they bring in their expertise. I think that would be the biggest step forward.
Yeah. So organize ourselves. So just what I mentioned earlier, we need to organize ourselves. That's not just it. In 2035, we need to organize also together with the local DFIs, with national DFIs in the emerging markets that by that time may not be emerging anymore.
Exactly.
And create this global network of development finance. Yeah. That assumes a lot of partnership capability for us. Yeah. Do you think that we have that as DFIs? Sufficiently in terms of culture, in terms of instruments, in terms of incentives? Is there a sufficient partnership capability?
Well, I think in general, in among the DFIs, the trust to work with partners is very strong. So I think that's a very positive point. I think the question is more a question of culture, and especially if you're going to be looking at developing country DFIs. There are some initiatives that have been taken throughout the years, and it's a long-term process, and it's always a question of culture. The same thing as when DFIs have started opening local offices. A huge step forward, I think, for most DFIs is when the staffing of these offices was mostly with people from the country or the region. I think that was a huge step forward in terms of opening up the DFIs to real partnerships also with other cultures. And so I think in that sense, we need to move forward. But I think, the trend is there. DFIs used to be all white. If you go to a DFI now, you will see that they will have staff from 20, 30 different nationalities. So I think we're setting the right tone, but we still have 10 years. So, but we'll need to move forward in those 10 years on this, yes.
Yeah, 2035, I said it a bit at random, but I agree. I mean, this is a long-term change agenda, and that there are already quite some very good trends visible about DFIs contributing a lot more to building these local capital markets, contributing a lot more to building local ecosystems.
Yeah.
That's on the positive side. Is there anything that DFIs should stop doing?
It's always difficult for any organization to stop things. I think, in a general sense, sometimes I have a feeling, and I was myself a CEO of a DFI for 12 years, and there was always this national and sometimes a bit of a petty interest in specific things that their DFI should be doing. When I remember when we suggested at some point, for co-investments, can we completely rely on other DFIs for due diligence and for checking the environmental and social governance standards? And some board members said, yes, of course. But there were a couple, and especially those who were coming from the government, from our shareholder, who said, but no, we can't trust any of them. What if there's a reputational problem? We really shouldn't be doing that. And so I think on all the national levels, also there, governments should accept much more than they do today towards their DFIs. We're in a global world. Our challenges are global. And if you stay focused on your purely national interest, it's not going to work for the country. It's not going to work for your DFI. So that's where really I think that's the one key thing I think that should stop.
Yeah. One last question, more on your inner world. Do you have the confidence that this will work, that we will progress until in 2035 we have reached that?
Yeah. Well, DFIs were first created, the very first DFI was created, I think, 1947. So we're talking about 80 years of DFIs. EDFI was created 1992, 34 years ago. DFIs, I think, have demonstrated that they can adapt to changing circumstances and stay relevant. I think the DFIs currently are in the best situation they've ever been in terms of volumes, in terms of impact, in terms of benefits that they bring to their shareholders. And so if they've demonstrated for such a long period that they can really have, an added value for their shareholders and for their clients, I'm very confident that this flexibility will continue for the next 10 years, yes.
So I'm extremely grateful for your confidence, because you also bring this confidence, to go back to the EDFI Academy. Every time we organize an EDFI Academy to the young people that have just joined EDFIs. And I think this confidence is extremely important.
Maybe interesting to do a podcast with one of those newly arrivals.
Absolutely.
And see what they think.
Absolutely.
And how they look at it.
That's a good idea. Yeah. So thank you so much, Luuk, for sitting here in Studio Sri Lanka. And I do think that one big thing that comes to me that really came on this table is that confidence that you have. Mm-hmm. And it's very heartening to see that someone with your experience, who has seen so many sides of development finance, actually now calls this moment of time one of the best times for opportunities, for seizing these opportunities. Yeah. And that we are actually quite well equipped as DFIs to play the critical role that we need to play, that we have played, some of us since 1947 already, as bridge builders between public ambition and private investment. Thank you. It's absolutely motivating to have you at such a pivotal position in our association. And we thank you for taking your time and joining this podcast, and also thank you for your excellent suggestions for our next podcast series.
My pleasure.
Thanks.
Colo, somos Guanasa. Hola, Alzana Baba. Satu. Puma.